Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to talk about DOM manipulation, explained like you are 5-year-old. So with real examples. So this is DOM manipulation. And then we'll start with the story. A few years ago, I came across this weird looking phrase, document.getElementById. So the first time I heard about this was from one of my technical mentors. And honestly, I did not understand what that was. So we just heard it like something magical. So it would be said document.getElementById. And I didn't know what that was. So I just thought it's a one word, like some magical thing. I didn't even know what it was exactly doing. And also I did not know that it was a function, and I just copied it and hoped it would work. So if that sounds like you, don't worry, you're in the right place. So in this article, I'm going to explain to you what the DOM is and how JavaScript talks to it and how you can use it to make interactive websites. So here's the table of contents. So the first thing we'll talk about is what is the DOM. And then the next thing we talk about is how to select elements from the DOM. So this includes grabbing individual elements from the DOM and then acting or performing some certain actions on them. So yeah, so number 3 is what can you do with the DOM element. So after selecting the element, then what's next after that? And then the next one is creating and removing elements dynamically. So how can we create elements away from HTML now? So how can we create more items dynamically? And then the next is how can we modify attributes with JavaScript? Maybe the hrefs, the source, ID, etc. And then how can we style elements from the DOM using JavaScript? And then you also notice that the first step we have is to select the element. So let me just open my Miro board. The first thing we need to do is select the element and then do something with the element. All right. And then the next thing we talk about is making websites interactive by adding event handling. So event handling means a user, like the way I have done here, I have highlighted. That's like an event. We have double clicking, we have clicking, maybe I clicked on this heading. All right, the user clicks on a button. So we have buttons here like share. You can see if I click share, there's some action that is happening behind the scenes. There's these 3 buttons. We have whenever I hover, we see them more, and then whenever I click, we see something else. So this is an event. So the first event is this more button is listening for a click event and then opens this model. Then whenever it also listens for an away click, if you click, what happens here is that this button has a click event listener that listens for a click, and whenever you click on it, it adds an overlay on top of all this, that the overlay also listens to an event of a click and then acts on hiding the model or the pop-up. So that's how we'll talk about the events and then finally the conclusion. And then we talk about the conclusion. So let's start. What exactly is the DOM? So the DOM stands for the document object model. And then you can think of this as a map or a blueprint for your web page. So every element such as the heading, the paragraphs, the buttons, the images become a JavaScript object that your browser creates behind the scene. So if this is how your HTML looks like, we have the H1, hello world, a button, click me. Then the browser creates a tree-like structure that looks like this. So you have the document. Beneath the document, you have the HTML, the head, body. So this is JavaScript objects that are created behind the scenes by JavaScript. So this is the DOM. So the DOM is the whole system whereby this HTML we are creating is transformed to an object oriented manner such that we can access any element from the DOM. So the whole tree-like structure is the DOM. So as we said, let's assume this is our DOM. Let me create the DOM here. And the DOM is a document. So the purpose of the DOM is to convert our HTML-like code or markup into JavaScript objects that have a hierarchy, which is parent, sibling, parent, sibling. So you have a parent. So here we have, let's start with the HTML. The typing on this is crazy. And then you have the body. And then in the body, we can now start having, let's say we have a navbar. And then, so this one is inside the body. And then the navbar has some list items. And then we have the main. It now has other elements. So they are all created in a tree-like structure like this. So you have the document, the HTML. So these are objects that are created by the browser behind the scenes. And then JavaScript is now able to access any element, change any element, and do all those kind of stuff. So with this, JavaScript can talk to any element in the tree and perform manipulations, e.g. removing an element, modifying an element, etc. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is, now let's assume this is JavaScript. So I'll give it color red. So let's assume this is JavaScript with the red color. And then JavaScript has access through the DOM to the HTML document. So let's assume we have a list item here. Let's add a heading. So in our navbar, we have, let's say, an image, which is a logo. A logo which is an image. So the first thing, maybe you want to change, let's use a heading. So we'll use a H for the heading. So our navbar has a heading which is like the title. So the first thing we need to ask ourselves is that in JavaScript, until this point, there's nothing we can do. There is nothing we can do. We can do absolutely nothing. So the first thing we need to do is to access that item. So we have to access that item and store it in a variable. So this one doesn't look nice. Let me just use this. So the first thing is that we can create a variable called maybe my heading. And inside we store the reference to the element. So that means we need a way to access that element in the HTML. Luckily, we do have different methods to access elements in the DOM. So the first one is called getElementById. So getElementById. It sounds like English. So you get that specific element by its ID. All right. We have another one, getElementByClassName. So you get element by its class. So a class is an attribute to an element. Right? It's basically used for us to be able to capture the element and then work on the element. And then you can also get an element by its tag. So if you have a h1, you can get that element from JavaScript by its tag. All right. And then we have new methods like the CSS selector, which is called the querySelector, as we'll see later on. But essentially, this doesn't matter. The thing we need to achieve is to get that element from JavaScript. And then if we get that element, we can start acting on that element. So for instance, we want to change the color of this heading. We have the reference to that heading. We store it in a variable, and then we can start styling and changing things. So we can say my h1.style.color equals maybe red. And then something else we can do is that, let's assume we have a button here for contact me. We can first grab the button and then add an event listener to the button. And then whenever that event is captured, we can do something else. I'll show you that. So this is essentially the basics of the DOM. So the next thing we need to tackle about is that, yes, we have a HTML document. So let me go to my Visual Studio Code. Then I have a blank HTML code. Then you can press exclamation mark to get a boilerplate for the document, because these are things that you don't need to cram. These are things that are essentially they are things that are there by default. So the only thing maybe we might change is the body start linking to JavaScript files, etc. So as we said, we can create a navbar here. This is a navbar element. And then inside here, we can create a heading and say, let's use my name. So we can use TechWithTwin. And then we can have a button. And then you can say, contact me. Or we cannot, let us not use contact. Let's say, change heading. Or we can say, my button. The first thing you realize is that this is a tag. These are tags. These are HTML tags. All these are tags. And then inside each element, we have access to creating an identifier. Maybe we can create an ID of the title. So that's an uniquely identifier for that H1 element. We can create a class also with the identifiers, but it's not unique. You can have multiple classes for multiple elements. So we can say my title. All right. So these are what we call attributes. They are like properties or enhancements to a tag. So we can stick with the tag. We can stick with the tag since we don't have multiple elements. All right. So what else do we need to achieve here? So we need to work with JavaScript, and the first thing you need to add JavaScript, you can add it inline using the script tag, or we can separate it in a new file. But since we are just starting out, we can use the inline script. So the first thing is to select an element from the DOM. So we do have we're in our JavaScript, and something else you need to note is that the script, we added the script at the bottom so that by the time the script lands, then the whole markup is already run. Because if we put the script here and we start accessing the elements have not yet been painted in the DOM. There's a workaround whereby you wait, but this is the simple starter point for us. So we said we have different methods to get an element from the DOM. All right. So the first one we have is, so to add a comment in JavaScript, you use 2 forward slashes. So to get an element from the DOM, we have 3 methods. Not 3, we have many methods, but I'll just talk about the common one. So we have get element by tag, and then you give it the tag, maybe H1. All right. We can get element by ID, and then here we provide the ID. Maybe I provided an ID of this equals to my title. So just come here and reference it by its ID, because the ID is the unique identifier. We can get it by the class name. So let's say the class given to this item is, maybe you can say title, then we can reference it with the title. And then we have new methods that are called CSS selectors, where you call it the query selector. And then this one, for the tags, you just add the tag. For the class, you just use the dot. Also, my class is the title. And for the ID, we use the hashtag, my title. So that is the syntax. So all these will do the same thing, but mostly in the most case, you can use the query selector. And in case you need to select more, you can use the query selector. Then you can say we can use the tag now and grab all buttons in the HTML document. So all these are methods we can use to grab elements from the DOM. So you reference it by the tag. So this one is not more effective in case we have, what if we had another h1 here, then this one wouldn't be a good way, because now we have to h1, we will now have some bugs. So we are left with the ID. The ID is a bit heavy. So in most cases, you can use the ID because it's a unique identifier for grabbing an item in the HTML. You can use the class, you can use the query selector. So in this tutorial, we are going to use the query selector. So what I can do is that const my heading, I can call it any name. This is a variable I'm creating JavaScript. This is something easy to do. It's not something that is necessary for our tutorial, but this is how you create a variable, and the variable you assign a reference to the item in the DOM. So we get there, you can say document.querySelector, and then we select the h1. So in this case, I'm not going to use the title nor the ID, but I could use. But since I just have one h1, I don't need to do that, right? So I can add a style here and say display flex, justify. So I'm just adding some styles because I know how it will look like. So the first thing we need, we got the reference to that item. And then we said we want, so the first task we had is to select an item or get the item from the DOM. So we already have the item. Then what next? So we could change its color, but it's better to change the color whenever some action happens. So we can grab our button as well. So we can say const my button is equals to document dot query selector, and then we grab the button. And then something else we'll talk about is the events. To add an event to the element. So in this button, we want to listen for a click event. So what is the syntax? So our button reference. So we have the button. So this one holds this button. So my button dot add event listener. So and the event listener receives two parameters. The first parameter is the action or the event you want to listen on. So in this scenario, we have so many events. You can see all of them. All these are events we can listen. We can listen for in the button. Then I want to listen for the click. And whenever we register a click, we can create a new function and say function button click handler, or we can call it handle click is a function. And what does this function do? It alerts, or we can alert for now. The button has been clicked. So the event listener receives two parameters. The first parameter is the action. The next parameter is the function that handles that event, basically. And then you could write the function directly here without having to separate it, because this is just a function. A function is a function. But for my case, I just opted to create the function away from the event listener so that I don't confuse you. So also something you might notice that to serve this HTML to the browser, we can use an extension called live server. So you can use an extension called live server, and then just go to the extension tab, install this, and then all we can do is to click the go live button. So it starts and it loads. So this is our project. So let me just even zoom in. There's no problem, even if the buttons are too large. So we added an event listener to this button, the click. So whenever you click this button, so we get the button from the DOM, and then we add an event listener which receives what kind of event we want to capture. We just want to capture the click, and the click is just one click, and then the function that handles that click. And as I said, we can create that function right here. It doesn't matter. So this is JavaScript. You can do whatever you want. And then you need to understand how do we create functions in JavaScript. We have so many types of functions. We have the arrow functions. So this is still a function. We have functions created with declared with function declaration. We have inline functions. So you can, this is still valid, but as I said, we need to start small and then understand whatever is happening. So we added a click event listener. So this button is waiting to capture this click, and then the function that handles that event. So if I click, you get the button was clicked is shown. All right. We not necessarily need the click. We can add, there's a one that is called, we have so many, by the way. So we have a click, we have drag, we have drop, we have error, focus, all these. We have key down, key up, and then key press, and then mouse move, mouse leave, mouse enter, mouse over. So let's try this mouse over. I think this one is for hovering. So you mouse over is for hovering. So whenever I hover, I didn't click, I just hovered, and then it works. All right. So let's check the final one. We can try to see. We have so many, by the way. You have so many. So we have, let's see, you have submit. All of these are so many. You have progress, play, mouse up, load, key press, input, focus, emptied. I don't know what this one is. DBL click. I'm thinking it's a double click. Let's see. I don't know. Yeah, it's a double click. So you double click and then it fires that same. So that's exactly how you handle events in JavaScript. So the first thing we did talk about is selecting an element from the DOM. We said we have different ways. So I gave a scenario here whereby you have a principal in a school and the principal needs to punish someone. So what is the first thing the principal has to do? The principal has to go get that person, go select that person. So maybe it's a student in grade 5. So you can go to grade 5, select that student, go to that student to the staff room and then punish them. So it's the same concept. You need to select the student and then the action, which I'm talking about here. So let's go back to our click. That's exactly. So first thing first, we need the reference to that item, and the item is here. We need to select it. And I said we have so many methods to select. I think we have around 4 or 5, but that doesn't matter. Whatever matters is, did we get the item? Yes. And then we add an event listener to the item. In this scenario, we added a click. And then after we get that click, what do? We handle that functionality. And that's essentially it. So you can select by ID, you can select by class name, you can select by tag, and then the modern CSS, whereby you use the query selector. So I have talked about all these. So what can you do with dynamic elements? We have talked about it. What you can do is that you selected it, you can add an event listener, and then you can change, instead of alerting here, we could change the color of the title. So we have access to the heading. So we do have access to the heading. And how do I know? This line here gets the heading from the HTML, this one. So having the heading, we have different methods that we can utilize. So we can call my heading. Whenever the button is clicked, we can call the heading dot. We have so many methods. So let me just show you. And we said, what can we do with the heading? We have so many ways. We can change the text inside. I think changing the text looks nice. We have a method called text content. Now a property called text content dot text content is equals to we change the text, then we can change the text to John. So what scenario are we having here? We are having a scenario whereby we have a reference to the heading, and then we have a reference to the button. We add an event listener to the button, and on the click handler, which is the handle click, since we have access to the heading, we can change its text content. So let me just show you. And then we get John. As simple as that. We can even change their style. So let's say whenever someone clicks, we also change the style. So to change the style, you say that dot style, and then the property you want to change in the style, which we want to change is the color. Then you say red. You can do all sorts of stuff, by the way. So we have TechWithTwin right here. The click handler calls, we change the name and we change the color. Essentially, that's it. And then the next thing is creating and removing elements dynamically. So we can create, in this scenario, I'm just going to put them side by side so that we can see. And then I think that's better. So whenever we click, we do all this, and then let's continue doing stuff. We can create elements using JavaScript. So we can say const my div is equals to document. This is the DOM. Document dot create element. We create an element and then we create a div. All right. When we create a div, we can do something from the created element. Similarly, we have access, but this element is not yet created in the DOM, but we have it in JavaScript. So we can do the div dot text content is equals to I am already created. And then we can append this div to the body. So we can say document dot body dot append child my div. So the steps here that we are following is you create the element. Here we didn't create the element because the element was already created, so we needed the reference to that element. So I can even use I hope you can see. So here we didn't create the element, we got access to the element by its reference by grabbing it from the DOM. But for our div, we don't have it in the DOM. So we create it. JavaScript can create it, and then we add stuff to it. So we add the text. So this is the text content. So in our div, it will be an empty div like this. So it will be div. So this will be an empty div. So that's why inside the div with the text content, we add the text content, which is this. And then this element doesn't exist in the DOM. So we append it to the DOM. And then if you save this and click, so the click handler, let's do it again. So the button has, we select the button, we have reference to the button, and then now we can add an event listener, which is a click in the handler for that click. The handler changes the text content for the title or the heading, and then it changes its color, goes ahead and creates a new div, adds the text content to the div, and then appends that newly created element to the DOM. Because we don't have it in the DOM, we created it in JavaScript. So we have it here. This one was all working, and then that's it on creating. And then we can, what else can we do? Yeah, that's essentially it, guys. There's nothing more to that. So we can create an element, and then for remove the element is still the same thing. So in this scenario, I'm going to create this div here, my div, and then we don't need all this because the div is present. And then we can grab the div and then create my div document dot querySelector div. We only have one div, so we can use the tag. And then here we want to remove the div, so we can say my div dot remove. So that once again we go through this. So once again we go through this is the div is already existing. We have already created it in the HTML. We get access to the div itself. And then during our click handler, we remove the div. So let's see, the div is gone. And it's essentially as simple as that. So the next thing we need to talk about is modifying attributes. So we have, let's create an image and give it, yeah, so let's see, well, let's first create an image. And then first we create the image. So here we can stop doing all this, but we can retain that, and then we don't need the div. So here we can create an image, and then the source, let's use my image. I don't know whether it will show up. Doesn't show up because it doesn't have a width. I assume that. So style width 50 pixels, and then a height of 50 pixels. So the image is not showing. So let's see. Now we need to add the .png. So .png. Yeah, you can see me there. Let me use 100 pixels. 100 pixels. You can see me here. So what if we want to change this picture dynamically whenever we click our button? So I have an image here from the random fox. This is a random image for a fox. This is the image we are working on. This is a fox image. So I want whenever I click the button, I change this image. So what we can do, we need the reference. As always, we need the reference to the image. You can give it any name. I'm just using my for the purpose of this tutorial. And then since we only have one image, we can, in this scenario, let's use a class. Class is equals to my image. So to get it using the class, we can do the dot my image. As I said that if it's a class, you use the dot. If it's an ID, you use the hash. If it's a tag, you use the tag as it is without any prefix. And then since we have access to the image, whenever the button is clicked, the event listener handles, the function is called, and then inside here, we can say my image dot, we have so many methods. We set attribute, we say this is an attribute. And then what attribute are we targeting is the source. So let's see, I think we need to use the, so, oh, it's a function. So the set attribute is a function. The first parameter is the item we need to change, which is the source. We want to change this source. And then what do we want to change it to? Is the value. So let's go through this. The button is clicked and then our image is changed the attribute. So let's see. The image is changed. And that's as simple as that. So we can do the same for the link, but I'm not going to show you that. I showed you how we can change the style. But to make it easier, instead of changing the style directly, we can start now changing the class itself. So this is still an attribute. We change the class list. This one is changing the class to the, so in case now this one, you have to have the CSS classes so that JavaScript changes the class itself. You can read more about that. And then to make we already tackled this topic whereby we handle the events. And then the conclusion, that's it guys. That's it from me about the DOM events, all that. Make sure you follow along for more videos. And happy coding guys. Subscribe to the YouTube channel and click on the bell and share this tutorial with your friends. Thank you.